Hey there guys, this week we're going to be taking a look at teachings control, and its most standard version is blue and black control. Now, we're currently entering in a new metagame. There are, new contenders at the top of our lists. Stompy is stepping up a little bit more. We still have Delver Blue, we still have Is It Post, and Affinity has kind of stepped up as well. And in this new metagame, I think there is actually some room for a blue and black control deck to really emerge. We have seen a lot of success actually out of Dimir Post. I know it's not showing up in significant numbers, however, every time it does show up, it is managing quite a few 4-0s. And I think it has a lot of potential. One of the things that you really get out of that is it allows you to attack things with counter magic before they actually hit the battlefield. And then with creature control, once they actually hit the battlefield, we now have targeted spells and whatnot that we can use to clear off the board. Now, there are a couple of other versions outside of Dimir Post that do work as blue and black control. There is a generic blue and black control deck, which varies from this mainly from the fact that it doesn't run mystical teachings. A generic blue-black control deck is a lot of the similar cards, however, it doesn't run mystical teachings, which is kind of the difference, and this allows you the tutors in the teachings version. The other thing we see a lot of is Dimir Trinket. That is something that hasn't really shown up a lot in this new metagame. It has shown from time to time. There might be a room for that to improve as well. That is a generic blue and black control deck that runs usually around 3 copies of the Trinket Mage, and this allows you to search up important one or less cost artifacts. The lands, which are great to fix your mana, things like Life Staff and the Spell Bombs. So there are some options for it, and that is a great deck as well. I'm not sure whether or not that's going to increase. I think there is some potential for it. We'll have to see what comes of that. But one of the things I really want to focus on here with the teachings, I know there has been a couple of people making comments as far as whether or not Is It control would fit under my generic header of teachings control. Is It Post does run mystical teachings, and it's a great card there, but it's not the focus. When you look at a teachings control deck such as this blue one that we see before you, the blue and black, it's really based around the idea that you're using mystical teachings to find different pieces out of your instant toolbox here. In Is It Post, it's used not so much in that fashion. I mean, it does fetch you instants, however, it's not the focus of the deck. It's going to help you draw cards out of your deck, it's going to help you find the pieces you need to finish your opponent off, but it's not the focus. The focus of an Is It control deck in Is It Post is building up the lands off the post lands. Some versions, it's get out the Crusher for the win. Others, it's going to be get out the Rolling Thunder or the Caravec's Torch, and that's going to be your win condition. So it really varies because there's a lot more aspects to it. Now, I did say teachings control is, most of the time it's going to be in blue and black. That allows you a lot of great things as far as things you have access to. You can see it in mono blue versions. Outside of Pauper, it has made blue control decks a very solid thing. It really accelerates mostly from the fact that mystical teachings allows you not only to search something up one time, but you get a second use out of it off of the flashback cost you see here, which is 5 and a black. This is why you will see it working great in the post decks, because they can run the Prism and they can siphon out some of that colorless mana into black and still be able to flashback mystical teachings in a similar way Forbidden Alchemy had made a showing here and there. It tends to be in Pauper a good thing in blue and black, because if you go mono blue with it, it doesn't balance as well. There's not as many great options, and if you go mono blue, you might as well drop the teachings out of the deck, which will throw off your curve, and just stick to a standard Delver build. When you look at mono blue control options, Delver is really going to be your best thing there, and you really don't necessarily have to play around with it. I know there are some just generic mono blue control things that work out, but they still follow a similar thing where they're not very counter heavy. We don't have access to a ton of great counter spells, and they don't have the same options that when you bring in this black to this deck, you get access to the kill spells, and it allows you that chance to attack things before they hit the battlefield, and actually once they're on the battlefield, you get options to kill off creatures and whatnot. There are some, drawbacks to the deck. It doesn't have a lot of fantastic artifact destruction spells. That's something you get a lot of in red, which would be absolutely great. But stretching this to 3 colors is going to be tough. It's not really worth it in 90% of the occasions. We do get some options in blue to deal with artifacts, but that can be a little bit tricky. you have a lot of options available to you from having teachings. There was, back when Thursday Night Magic occurred, we had a version that showed up that was 5 colors, and that was, crazy. It was fun. I play it in the casual room every now and then just because it was a funny build. It doesn't work all the time, but it's kind of interesting to see that a 5-color teachings deck did manage to show up and end up in the money. What's really great about teachings is it's basically the only tutor we have access to in Pauper. Mystical Teachings, for those who are not totally familiar, it is a 4-cost instant that allows you to search your library for a card that is an instant or has flash, and then you reveal it to your opponent and put it in your hand. It also has that flashback cost, so it basically creates card advantage because you get 2 spells for the cost of 1 card, and you can reuse that for the same thing. So the 5-color version actually managed to pull in a couple of the flash creatures, so it was really cool because I'm going to blank on the name here, but there is the large green worm that you can flash into combat. And I think there's a couple of new options, so you get the Shamble Shark and stuff like that, that are cool. But I think Teachings really works well here in blue and black because, once again, counter magic, creature control, that lands it in. So this is the version that I currently play with. And we're going to cover some of the aspects here, but I think the big thing that I need you to understand about this is that you're basically creating a toolbox. In most cases, and I look at decks and stuff, it's not always a good idea to be running singleton cards. Usually you want the most value out of cards, and if you get to the point where you're only running a whole bunch of 1s and 2s, what happens is that your deck is not focused enough. And I see it a lot of times with newer players who are trying to brew their own Pauper decks and even in other formats. And there's this whole thing where if you're running a number of spells and you're just running 1 of them, or you're running 2 of them, your deck may be fragmented and you may be trying to do way too much. What you usually want to do is focus them up. Having 4 or more cards, when you have an option to have 4 cards, and having many spells that are, sitting at that 4 of, you're going to find a spell that's really strong and you want to run the maximum. Things here like the Rats and the Muldrifter. It's a really great card, and so I want as many of those as possible. In most decks, this is what you want to do. You want to have as many of those as possible because it basically increases your odds of drawing that card. Not only that, but it gives you many more opportunities, and you get the maximum opportunities to reuse that spell. So in most decks, that's the case, but in Teachings, we want to kind of shift things. You get a lot of 1s and 2s, and that's okay because you now have access to Teachings, which can help you tutor them up. It's, a great way to get around certain things and find exactly what you need. If you look at something like Is It Post and how they run Teachings, they get a lot of options to find things like Condescend and, draw spells maybe at an instant speed. And, it really gives you that option. You really don't need to run more than a single Capsize in Is It Post, because if you're not drawing it off of the numerous draw spells, you get Teachings, which is allowing you to find that as well. So it's basically allowing you a toolbox, and toolbox, I refer to it a lot. If you hear others refer to it in a deck, it's usually considered, imagine like a Swiss Army knife. If you've got a single knife there, but it's got all these little blades and gadgets that you can pull out. So it's kind of a similar thing. This deck has, it's one single deck, but there's a lot of different things I can pull out of it. I've got Grave Recursion, I've got counter spells, I've got creature control. And, you're able to pull all these things out by running Mystical Teachings. So hopefully that gives you a generic view of how the deck is generically supposed to work. Let's take a look, I guess, at some of the card choices that I made with this deck. The mana base is pretty standard. We are running a full set of Evolving Wilds, which is going to help us thin out the mana base. Like Is It Post, you want to be drawing cards, you want to be sifting through your deck pretty well so that you can find the answers you need. You can find the Teachings. Again, when you're running so many 1-ofs or 2-ofs in your spells, it's really good to be able to find those spells when you need them. So if you're not getting Teachings, you still have options as far as drawing cards, and you see most of that is done in our creature base, but you want to be able to draw cards and siphon through your deck pretty well. So running the Evolving Wilds gives you that opportunity to find out those lands and shift down your deck a little bit. It also helps with your color fixing. The mana base is pretty well balanced between blue and black. However, still, you can end up with those draws where you get a little bit heavier on one or the other, and you need to find that additional one. Maybe you need to find a second blue for your Archimancer, something like that. So having the Evolving Wilds in there, four really, you look at this mana base here and you have 4 Evolving Wilds and 4 Aqueducts and a single bog. I'm sorry, 3 Aqueducts. And what these all do is they all enter the battlefield tapped. So, at first it looks a little bit troublesome, and it can be depending on how your draw is. Most times it's not an issue, but there is absolutely that chance that you can run into a draw where you're tapping out on a lot of these lands that you start in the beginning with. But it's really going to become important to get those colors that you need. It's definitely a mid to late game deck. You want to be doing the early game control. If you see most of our kill spells and counter magic, it's all in that 1 or 2 converted mana costs slot. And you really need to be finding those cards so that you can control the early game, get to the mid to late game where you can get your bigger creatures out, and you have plenty of mana available to not only cast a Teachings in a single turn, but also cast whatever you fetch with that mystical Teachings as well. So that's pretty important. So getting things like the Aqueduct and stuff like that, it's going to be a little bit slow at first, but you should be able to get to that mid game pretty easily. And it's could be a little bit tricky depending on your draw. I will definitely admit, if you're finding yourself against Stompy a lot, maybe the speed will be too much for you, but it's something that definitely is going to be situational based upon what your draws are. Apparently having trouble talking today. So the Aqueducts are, I guess, kind of an interesting thing. You could make an argument that these could be easily replaced with Guild Gates now that we have access to them, but one of the nice things that the Aqueducts will allow you to do is replay the Bog. We're currently in a meta game that I feel is getting a little bit more reliant on the graveyard, and you'll see, I think a couple of people have started running Relics, maybe Sideboard. There are things that, really work out with that. Things like Dimir Post run the Archimancer combo, Izzet Post runs the Walls, and they are interacting with returning cards to the graveyard. Also with those two builds, you get Mystical Teachings and Forbidden Alchemy, depending on what your opponent's build is. Those are something that they can have access to, and they can be returning stuff from the graveyard, so you really don't want to be running into that. Occasionally, Mono Black Control runs Unearth, and so, that'll give you an opportunity to get rid of those. There are some Undying mechanics, things like the Loyal Cathar and Mono White aggro. You can kill it off and then play the Bog to remove it before it comes back. So, there are a lot of things like that that can be removed. So, there's a lot of times where the Bog has really started to step things up. Occasionally Goblins runs Death Spark, and that is Graveyard Interactive. So, having the Bog in there, I think, is really great. It gives you a lot of options for dealing with kind of some of those matchups. If you're kind of feeling that your metagame is leaning towards more of, Affinity. Affinity is something that is going to be not really caring if you remove the graveyard, and then maybe Guild Gates aren't so bad. Fissure Storm actually is another one that uses the Ghostly Flicker combo, and I think most versions, whether it's Fissure Post, Familiar Storm, or the enchantment version, I think most of those are running a pretty heavy reliance on Ghostly Flicker, some more than others, but that does allow them the opportunity to get back some of the cards, including Temporal Fissure, which is occasionally run as a 2 of in their deck, so they need the ability to return it to their hand and re-storm. So getting rid of stuff like that is really great, and I think that is definitely the argument for running the Aqueduct so that you can keep reusing the Bog. There are occasions where, maybe in the early game you had to start with a Bog, and you know what it's like to play a Bog before your opponent has anything in the graveyard, it's useless. And then later on you may be like, crap, now I need it. So the Aqueducts do give you that ability. And like I said, occasionally you will run into the situation where it is a little bit slow because your draw has only tap lands, but in most cases, you should be able to hold things off pretty well thanks to your low curve on your control spells, and move on from there. So let's move to the creature base. I did say pretty much all of our draw, if you don't count Teachings as a draw spell, is going to be in our creature base here. We're running a full set of Mulldrifters and a full set of Seagate Oracles, and these are great. The Oracle obviously is going to give you an opportunity to choose a spell, or choose a land for that matter. Choose one of the 2 cards and put it into your hand, and that's great. It's basically a tutor within the top 2 cards of your deck. Mulldrifter is just straight draw spells, and you can play those early, obviously, for the evoke. It's going to be kind of your heavy creature damage is going to come off of Mulldrifters because of the evasion. If you look here, your biggest power is going to be the Mulldrifter at 2 and the Ninja at 2. So this is very much like things like the Mirror Post, where you don't have a lot of big aggro. Even actually, I guess Familiar Storm is kind of the same way. They don't have a lot of big aggro creatures, and what they're going to try and do is finish you off over a period of turns with some fast damage. I'm sorry, some slow damage, some small creatures, whittling away at your life total. Maybe it's a couple of early damage points off of Ravenous Rats, getting down 2 there, and then moving on to Mulldrifters in the mid to late game. Ideally, you're going to be able to keep your control active enough that you can keep the board clear and get the damage through to finish them off. You do have to be careful at some points in the mid to late game, I guess more the late game, where you find yourself in a situation where you are drawing too much. If you are using Ghostly Flicker on Mulldrifters, if you use Grim Harvest on Mulldrifters, you can be drawing way too many cards, and you could deck yourself. So you definitely have to be aware of that. Using Teachings as well could deck yourself if you're just not paying attention. So a lot of the draws coming off of these, because these all have enter the battlefield effects, Ravenous Rats as well as Archomancer, you do have a lot of opportunity for these ninjas. The ninja's a great card. It is seen a lot of play in Delver, and it's a big thing there because you can return things like your Spell Stutter Sprite, and that gives you a reuse of Counterspell. Now, in this thing, it gives you opportunities to redraw. It gives you opportunities to force more discard. You can get a lot of great plays off where you start with a turn 2 rat, and when you attack on turn 2 with your Ravenous Rats, you can ninja in the Ninja the Devours. This allows you to draw cards off it, and then replay the rat for an additional discard. You can get a lot of great discard off of those, and it works really great for things like Fissure Post and Familiar Storm. All those things that are going to be reliant on building up their hand. Even if you get, a good jump on Delver where they're tapped out, and you can get some of that extra discard going, that can be helpful as well. So the Ravenous Rats is basically going to be that control aspect. You do have a lot of counter control and a lot of creature control, obviously, in your non-creature spells. Ravenous Rat's going to be your only main deck discard option, though we do have some sideboard chances as well. Having a little bit of discard is enough to maybe disrupt your opponent, throw away a card or two, slow down things like goblins. If you consider a goblins deck or elves, they're going to be hard to deal with because they are fast, weenie creatures. However, you do get some good blocking off of the Oracle at 3 toughness, and Ravenous Rats is going to really slow them down as well. What you consider with a deck like even Affinity can give you maybe a chance or two depending on if you're drawing enough of the creature kill. But what can happen with those decks is what they look to do is drop their hand as fast as possible, and so they can do as much damage. And when they get to the point, burn as well, where they have dumped their entire hand, they're in top deck mode, and now they have to sit there and they have no hand, and they're relying on whatever they draw. And if it's a land, well, they've got no play for the turn. So if you can disrupt their hand, if you can get rid of a threat or two, you slow down their deck and still put them into top deck mode pretty fast. So it's not a focused strategy. This is not something like the abuse of the Wall or the Archomancer and Ghostly Flicker to bounce the Chittering Rats and slow down your opponent's draw. It's not something like that. However, it is still going to give you some opportunities to slow down your opponent. Like I said, you can get some replays off it based on the Ninja, and the Ghostly Flicker is still an option there as well. So it's really is the toolbox, because you do have the counter, the discard, and the creature kill, and those 3 are basically your 3 aspects of control. I guess you could also consider land control, which is not main deck here, but you get a lot of replayability off that. So definitely be aware of that. It can be very helpful in matches where you don't even expect it to be. Infect? I know it's not something that's as popular these days, but if you manage to force them to discard a pump spell or 2, they may not be able to finish you off as fast before you can get stabilized. Archaeomancer is basically the new wall that we've had printed. It allows you to return an instant or sorcery from your graveyard to your hand. This can be used in a lot of great ways, but the most important reason is for the Ghostly Flicker combo. You can see this deck is only running one of each because, you know, as important as this Flicker combo is, it is not the focus, and it's kind of fragile. There are a lot of times where you can simply have that creature killed off and can't really get things going. You really don't want it to be the focus of the deck. The focus of the deck is more the instant package that you're building up here, that you're searching out with teachings and the control that gives you. The Archaeomancer combo is great. It does give you a lot of, you know, fun things to do, drawing extra cards, moving the bogs, you know, oracles to search for things, discard off the rats, and these are all fantastic things to do. However, you know, it's not the focus of the deck. It's a great thing to have in there. It's a threat that your opponent needs to watch out for, but you know, it's not the main focus of the deck. And so if they're so focused on getting rid of that, maybe you can slide in an extra, you know, creature where you can, or something like that. So, you know, if you go overboard with that, it doesn't really work out as well. If you consider something like Fissure and Dimir Post, they get a little more reliant on it because they want to return more. They want to abuse things like Glimmer Post and the infinite life gain you can basically get off of that. And this is just not that case. Again, it's something where it's a threat that your opponent has to be aware of, but you don't want it to be the focus of your deck by any means. What this deck tries to do is be so balanced between, you know, drawing cards, discard, creature kill, counter spells, that your opponent really doesn't know exactly where to attack it. It is control, but it is kind of leaning towards mid-range as well. So I guess let's cover our instant package that I am currently running here. Now, Mystical Teachings is obviously the linchpin of this deck. However, it's something that you should never run 4 of. There are a couple of decks that run 4, and I feel it's entirely unnecessary. 4 is a lot. Basically, with the flashback, that is going to give you 8 opportunities to use Mystical Teachings, and that is going to be way more than you need. When you do that, you are basically reducing either the creatures you have, and it's harder for you to deal damage over time, or you're going to be reducing the spell options that you have available to you, and you know, it's going to kind of dumb down your control package. You could reduce lands, but that's going to kind of hurt you because in the late game you're looking to have a lot of mana available so that you can, again, do something like flashback Mystical Teachings and still pay the cost of whatever spell it is you find. So I really don't recommend running 4. I think 3 is a good number. It gives you 6 opportunities to use Mystical Teachings, and it accounts basically for you drawing into things, and keeps it pretty well balanced. 4 is just overkill, I think. So getting into our package here, I'm kind of breaking things down. Let's start from this end. This is basically going to be our creature kill package. I'm running 3 copies of Disfigure. You know, I do like things where, you know, the enchantment that gives -2/-2, and that's all well and good, but again, we're running an instant package. If you look across, every one of our non-creature spells is instant because we want to be able to find them with teachings. So Disfigure is great. It works at 1 single black mana. That's going to work very well for killing some of those early creatures, getting a Delver under control in the early game, getting down a Frogmite or whatever. It also works to balance things out on the combat damage. You can use the blocking and damage off of one of your smaller creatures and Disfigure to finish it off. Doomblade is in here. It's a great targeted kill. Obviously going to be trouble for mono black control decks. That's something, luckily, that we don't see as much, so it's not going to matter. Well, I guess that's harsh to say. It doesn't matter. It's mono black control is not something that is currently being heavily played, so don't be so concerned about non-black. Doomblade is hands down the greatest kill spell that we do have available to us, outside of, you know, burn and stuff like that. Agony Warp is a fantastic card that I love. I think it should get more play. Unfortunately, because it does come in at the blue and black cost, it is harder to do. Target creature -3/-0 and target creature -0/-3. So this can work great in combat. You can basically shut down 2 creatures entirely by reducing one's attack to 0 or lower and killing off a second. So that works very well. And again, you know, you don't really want to be running a lot of things in 4 ofs. the Disfigure and the Counterspell are sitting at 3 because they're kind of the strong cards. Like I said, you want to be able to control things in the early game pretty easily, and Disfigure is going to do a lot of that. It's also going to mean that you can play Disfigure for a simple cost of Teachings at 4 plus Disfigure for a total of 5. So it gives you that option. It's cheaper to fall into that curve. So when you see a lot of these at 2 of, it's pretty much the ideal spot, and as great as Agony Warp is, as good as Doomblade is, most of the time you don't need or want them to be in excess of that. If you have them in the sideboard, sometimes extra Doomblades are in the sideboard for things like Crushers. It's not so bad because of the fact that you're going to want them to deal with those. You would probably take out these Disfigures because Izzet Post is not going to be running a lot of creatures that will hit. Obviously it hits Mulldrifters, but you could finish those off with other better options, maybe Edicts. Either way, you can use the Doomblades to take out the Crushers. But that's going to be the exception of the rule. This, going into game 1, you're going to want the toolbox available to you. You're going to want as many options as possible because you're not entirely sure what your opponent is playing. After game 1, you know a bit better what they are running and whether or not you can fit in more Doomblades or something like that. Edict is obviously in there. It's a great kill spell as well. It's going to be used mostly for the hexproof options and stuff like that. Of course, it's not as good as Doomblade because of the simple fact that it cannot target a creature your opponent gets to choose, so as soon as they get more than one creature on there, it's going to be a little bit less effective. Works great for a hexproof, however, it's going to be your only way to basically deal with those. You can run stuff like Nausea. It's not fabulous, but it is an option there. It's not as good absolutely as Electrickery, which allows you that instant speed, so you can do it in response to an enchantment being played. This is basically going to be one of the better options that Black has available to it for dealing with this. Now, Echoing Decay is still in here. During the days of Storm with Empty the Warrens, it was a much more important card. I think that a single copy of Echoing Decay is still a good idea, especially in a toolbox build like this. It's going to work great, if you come against Fish or something like that where they're getting, multiple Mulldrifters. It's not always going to be a perfect way to kill a whole bunch of creatures. You're not always going to find yourself in a situation where there's maybe multiple Delvers, there's multiple Fae, there's multiple Drifters, multiple of anything that you can actually kill with Echoing Decay. However, that every once in a while where it does happen that way and it does work out in your favor, you want to go for it and you want to have that available. Like I said, Mystical Teachings into Echoing Decay can be absolutely a great move and get you out of a lot of tough situations. I think it's still absolutely acceptable to have at least one Echoing Decay in there, just for the fact that when it does work, it's going to work great. A lot of things in Pauper, kind of, I guess if we were to map out what the overall average defense would be for creatures that are played in competitive Pauper, I think it would definitely fall within 2, where the most of the creatures fall under 2. Goblins, stuff like that, elves. Echoing Decay is going to be a great option because they're going to get a lot of those things into play. So I think it's definitely something that I don't want to leave out of this deck, even though it is nowhere near as powerful as it used to be with Storm. So that's basically going to make the creature kill package, and this is obviously going to be a lot stronger. You see these spells versus the 5 counter spells, going to be a lot stronger than the counterspell package in your deck because of the fact that we're in a very creature heavy metagame. Counter magic is great. It slows things down before it hits the table. However, once it hits the table, that's it. When you're playing a lot of these decks that are very creature heavy, you want a lot of options to kill off the mini creatures. Once again, your package of damage is very, very small. If you're facing something like Stompy or Goblins, the best way for you to deal damage is going to be Mulldrifter, and it's going to be slow. You're going to have to take many turns of a few damage to get to that point. That's going to be your saving grace, because if you didn't have those Mulldrifters, or if you're facing something like Delver that can block in the sky, you're going to really need to clear those creatures off the board to do your damage. If you can't successfully do that and you can't get your damage through fast enough, it's definitely a late game deck, but you have to be aware of your clock. You have to be aware of drawing yourself out, because of the fact that that is a very real possibility for those decks to beat you that way, because of the fact that you're drawing a lot of cards, and if you can't get through there, their important creatures to do what little damage you actually have available to you, you're not going to be able to win. It's not like something like Is It Post. Consider Is It Post and how most of that those versions run things like Rolling Thunder as your win condition. It's very simple. You build up your mana cost, you get Rolling Thunder, and 9 times out of 10 you're going to cast it and win. Or you may have to counter to keep it alive, but here's my win condition. It's a single card. It's Rolling Thunder. It's Karavek's Torch. I'm going to throw it to your head. I'm going to win the game. In a control deck like this, it's much slower. You have to go very slowly in your damage dealing. You have to occasionally whittle away at 1 damage at a time. You may have to attack with quite a few things to do a single point of damage, stuff like that, just to be able to slowly do it. It gets a little bit more tricky against post decks. I think if this deck has a failing, that might be it. If they can get a lot of life gained off of those Glimmer Posts that can slow you down. In contrast, they also don't run a lot of creatures to block you, so it's really a tight balance in that matchup, I believe. So you definitely want to be running a heavier creature kill package because of the current metagame that we're facing. You want to have options available for playing Affinity as something you're going to run into, I guarantee it, as well as Stompy. Even Delver, that is aggro control and can run a significant amount of aggro. So counter magic, I am running a 3-sum of counterspells. Again, I think as part of your package here, you don't want any of these control instants to be running more than what you have as teachings. I know some people will run 4 counterspells, but I think as soon as you reach into that 4 of slot on any of these spells, what that's doing is reducing the number of slots in your deck for something different. And it's no longer becoming a toolbox, it's becoming a centered UB control. When you have teachings and you're running a quote-unquote toolbox, you want to be able to run 1-ofs and 2-ofs to be able to get through and do that damage. Dispel is my other one at the counter magic side. I'm only running a 2-of. Dispel is a great card, a single blue mana to counter a target instant. Has a lot of great uses in the current metagame. However, it is not going to be the end-all. There are plenty of things that are not instants. Creatures, can't be targeted. Sorceries can't be targeted. Artifacts, basically, can't be targeted. So it's going to have a lot of great applicants in Storm. In Stompy. Infect, it gives you options for targeting down pump spells. Against Delver, obviously, it'll help counter magics. So it's a great card to have. Again, one of the great things about a toolbox is it's supposed to kind of give you not necessarily an edge in the first game, but it's supposed to help balance things out because you have such a toolbox, you have all the answers that you need. So no matter what your opponent's running, you'll have mostly what you're going to need to beat them. After you move into game 2 and 3, you've sideboarded in things and it gets even better odds. So Dispel is one of those things that targets a lot of things, but if you find yourself against Hexproof where Dispel targets nothing, then you know right away, okay, this is an easy thing to sideboard out. I'm going to obviously get rid of these Dispels because they don't target anything in their deck. Because, Hexproof is running just creatures and just enchantments. So you really, are going to be using it in, that first game you'll go, okay, I've just drawn a dead card. But once you sideboard it out, you go, okay, no big deal. We'll move on from here. Hopefully you can target things down enough with what you have. So beyond those, we are running these 2 singletons, and these are kind of oddball cards, but they're also great instants. Ghostly Flicker, we kind of talked about the combo and what you have available to you off of Flickering the Archaeomancer. It gives you a lot of great things to do with these enter the battlefield effects, and it works out really great in that way, but you don't want more than one. We're running a single Archaeomancer, and I said we don't want that to be the focus of our deck. Now, Grim Harvest is another one of. This is by choice. I know there's a lot of versions that don't run it, but here's the reason why I think it's important. We kind of talked about in a couple of different times here the importance of getting what damage through that you can. If you're in a situation where the only damage you're able to get through is through the Muldrifters in the air because of the flying and the evasion that provides you, you're at a stalemate, say you're blocking with oracles, they can't get through, you can't get through, but they've managed to kill off all 4 of your Muldrifters, and now you're really stuck. You can't get any damage through, they can't get any damage through, and you're basically going to lose to timeout or card draw. So Grim Harvest gives you that opportunity. You can search it out, you can get those Mole Drifters back, and you can put them into play so you can get through. Once again, just a cautionary tale. I know I've personally done it, not paying attention and decked myself off of the Jaw and Mole Drifter ninjas. But it's a great opportunity and it's reusable. You can use it on the Archaeomancer. It's, again, you only have a singleton of each of these for the combo between these. So having Grim Harvest available means that you get an opportunity to bring back the Archaeomancer once you have the other combo piece. In an early game, the Archaeomancer is great. It can give you the opportunity to replay a kill spell or a counter spell. But in the mid to late game, it's part of this combo that's going to, again, give you that opportunity to play something. So what you can do with that is, if it dies and they kill it before you get that combo online, you can use Grim Harvest to bring it back. And by running singletons of these, it's great with this whole toolbox effect because, you have these singletons and you really don't need more. You don't really need to focus on having more Ghostly Flickers and Archaeomancers because you're not that reliant on returning stuff. And when you have Grim Harvest, that kind of gives you more opportunities to do it. This is all about kind of card advantage you're creating. Archaeomancer is creating card advantage by giving you reuse on one of these instant spells. Ghostly Flicker is giving you card advantage by allowing you to replay, and enter the battlefield effect. These cards are giving you straight up card advantage in hand control and draw spells. Grim Harvest is giving you card advantage because you're getting extra creatures beyond this. Okay, I've got 4 Ravenous Rats. I've played all 4, you've killed 1 or 2, but I'm able to break those rules. We have very strict rules in Magic. You're going to be running 60 cards. That is going to be your deck. It's going to be 60. You're going to be running spells, and you can run no more than 4 of any spell. No more than 4. So any opportunity I can have that allows me to kind of cheat that is going to be great. We run no more than 4 Ravenous Rats. However, we can use these rats more than once. We can use the ninja to return the rat and replay it. Okay, I've got 4 rats, I've returned 1 and replayed it. Basically, I've just used the effect 5 times. If I'm using Grim Harvest, I can bring it back from the dead, and I've used it more times. So consider for the fact that you have 4 rats. Consider that they can be replayed off of 3 ninjas. Now you're looking at 7 opportunities to do that. Now bring in Grim Harvest and, almost unlimited times of replaying it, and you've got a way to abuse the fact that you're running basically more than 4 of the effect. You're following the rules, you're only running 4. However, you have that replayability. Mystical Teachings, also card advantage. It's 3 spells, but it's allowed you to flash it back, so you can use it 2 times. 3 card slots used 6 times. You also get that opportunity to search things out. You're searching out a card from your deck that's literal card advantage in drawing things, and helping you find, what you need to create other card advantage through countering and killing. So every single card in this deck is going to be based around that idea of creating card advantage in some way or another. So, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the sideboard, but I do want to show it off here. And this is a sideboard I'm not entirely happy with, if I'm completely honest. What I'm running here, I am running 2 extra copies of Diabolic Edict. We had 2 in the main deck. And these are, again, obviously for hexproof. When you come against hexproof, again, you can easily switch out 2 dispels for 2 Diabolic Edicts because of the fact that the spell is going to touch nothing. Edict is not a perfect thing. It's not going to be able to handle many of the creatures. If they get more than 1 on the board, then they will have the option to sacrifice something with either less enchantments or no enchantments. They also will run, things like Standard Bearer, so it's not so terrible to have the Doom Blades. You can get rid of those in the early game that will, draw off things. Duress is in there mostly for the Fissure matchup. It can be used on other things again, if you wanted to bring it in against something like Infect or Hexproof to get rid of some of the stuff in their hand before they can pump it up. That's an okay option, but again, it's really in there for Fissure Storm. If you use it in the early games to get rid of a Fissure, to get rid of a draw spell, to get rid of something that they're going to need to really get that storm off and work well, you can use it to kill off or get rid of, a counterspell, you can use it to get rid of just anything that it targets, obviously. But it's going to be a great card for the Fissure matchup, most importantly, because you can kind of disrupt their Storm ability and what they have. 3 copies of Hydroblast. This is kind of where I'm starting to get less certain about what I have going on here, personally, because Hydroblast, it'll work great against goblins. It has some applications on Is It Post. It can take down a Tog, which is really great for that. But I'm not sure. I guess where my debate is going is whether to run 2 Steel Sabotage. Now, Steel Sabotage is a 1-cost instant blue spell that allows you to either counter an artifact or return an artifact to its owner's hand. So, part of me says, well, maybe I want 3 Sabotages and 2 Hydroblasts, because these are all cards, both cards that I would bring in against Affinity. So those, debate back and forth on whether or not, because there are a couple of versions, they are rare and far between, but there are a couple of versions of Affinity that don't even run a Tog. So Hydroblast would be mostly useless. I think I'm currently leaning towards the 3 Hydroblasts because it also helps you deal with things like the Galvanic Blast that also comes with Affinity. As well as, like I said, it works against goblins, which have, I guess, stepped up more than they used to. They're still not played that often, and it works well against the Rolling Thunders and stuff like that out of Is It Post, which is definitely out there more. Innocent Blood is in there for, obviously, the Diabolic Edicts for the Hexproof matchup. We don't have a lot of creatures that we're going to be hurt by a couple of Innocent Bloods. The one thing that you have to be aware of in Duress and Innocent Blood are that these 2 are sorceries. So you can't find them out of teachings. They are not going to be as, I guess, magical as they could be if they were instant speed. But what happens is Diabolic Edict you're running a 4 of. We did get a new Edict in Gatecrash that I might give a try at that spot there instead of Innocent Blood to balance that out. That basically, again, we were just talking about ways that we can abuse the fact that they have 4 cards. So, that 4 of rule can be abused by the fact that we use, hey, this spell is basically the same effect, but it's been reprinted with a different name. The one drawback that I do see with the new Edict is the fact that it allows your opponent to gain life off of the sacrificed creature. And this is a deck that can occasionally struggle with dealing 20 damage. So if they're gaining a lot of life, then it's not going to balance out. So if I do switch those out for those Edicts, I am still going to run 4 Diabolic Edicts just because of the fact that they don't force life gain. Negate is also a great counterspell if you're looking for options against things like Posts and Delver. And this is, obviously counter target non-creature. Sorry, I'm hearing this weird scratching in the walls, and it's kind of freaking me out. So I think I'm going to wrap this up here. But what's basically going to happen, I'm going to, below here in the article, we're going to talk about some of the other card choices that you have available to you. Like I said, this is what I'm currently running as my sideboard, but I'm not totally sold on it. One of the great things that you do get out of Teachings, again, is the fact that you have a toolbox available to you. Teachings allows you to find pieces and put them into play. It gives you a lot of great options, and there are a lot of great instants and sorceries that we have in blue and black that can really make things happen. So again, check out the article below here. We are going to be talking about some of the other card options, and we'll even throw up a couple of games, obviously.